Picture yourself standing in a strange land, 170,000 years ago. Not a single thread on your body. The wind is cutting into your skin like 1,000 tiny needles. Your teeth are chattering. And you're looking around, desperate for literally anything you could wrap around yourself. This isn't a scene from a survival movie. This is exactly what your ancestors went through when they left warm, sunny Africa and stepped into a world where their bare skin, the same skin that had protected them perfectly under the African sun, suddenly became a liability, a big one. And the answer to the question, when did humans start wearing clothes, comes from one of the strangest evidence trails in all of science. We're talking lice, bone needles, and a cave in Siberia so cold you don't even want to think about standing there without a jacket. First, let's rewind to something we covered before. Dark, bare skin was a near-perfect survival machine. Under the African sun, melanin blocked UV, protected DNA, protected folate. No extra layer needed. In fact, having your skin exposed directly to sunlight actually helped you make vitamin D more efficiently. But once humans started migrating out of Africa somewhere between 70,000 and 100,000 years ago, they walked straight into environments where cold, not sunlight, was the enemy. And skin, no matter how brilliant, doesn't just grow thick fur or a layer of insulating fat in one generation. Biological evolution is way too slow for that. Humans needed a faster fix. That fix was clothing. But the harder question is exactly when. This is where the story gets wonderfully weird, because direct evidence, actual hides, actual woven fabric, almost never survives tens of thousands of years. Organic material rots. It disappears. So what did scientists turn to instead? Something nobody would expect. Lice. There are two kinds of lice that live on humans. Head lice, which live in your hair, and body lice, which live in clothing and only crawl onto skin to feed. Body lice cannot survive without clothes to call home, which means this species could only have evolved after humans started wearing clothing regularly. Geneticists analyzed the mutation rate between these two louse species to calculate when they split into separate species. The result? Roughly 170,000 years ago. A tiny bug that you'd normally want to obliterate on sight turned out to be the most precise time machine we have for the history of human fashion. But wrapping a hide around your body and sewing a fitted outfit are two completely different levels of technology. The earliest physical evidence of actual sewing comes from bone needles found at Denisova Cave in Siberia, dating back roughly 50,000 years. These needles have eyelets for thread, polished so precisely that modern archaeologists still find themselves impressed, which means at least 50,000 years ago, humans weren't just draping animal hide over their shoulders like a blanket. They were cutting, fitting, and stitching it into close-fitting garments, tight enough to survive a Siberian winter, where temperatures can drop to -40. And this is exactly what makes clothing one of the most consequential inventions in human history, bigger than most textbooks ever give it credit for. Without clothing, humans never make it into the frozen expanses of Siberia. Without Siberia, nobody crosses the Bering Land Bridge. Without that crossing, there's no human presence in the Americas tens of thousands of years before Columbus. In other words, if your ancestors hadn't figured out how to wrap a hide around themselves, there's a real chance both American continents stay completely empty of people until someone shows up on a sailboat. Now here's the part most people get completely wrong. We tend to assume clothing was invented because of shame, because of some built-in idea that nakedness is indecent. But the scientific evidence tells a completely different story. Clothing wasn't born from morality. It was born from temperature. It was pure survival technology, no different from the invention of fire or a stone tool. The idea that nakedness equals shame is a cultural layer that got bolted on later, tens of thousands of years later, and it's far less universal than we assume. Plenty of indigenous cultures around the world, from tropical Africa to the Pacific Islands, lived with very little or no clothing right up until contact with Western missionaries, people who brought with them not just religion, but an entire value system about decency that had nothing to do with the local climate or culture. To them, wearing very little in tropical heat was the most logical thing in the world, not a moral failing. which means the connection between clothing and shame, something many modern societies treat as self-evident, is actually a very young, very local byproduct of history, not a biological truth about human beings. And there's a cost to wearing clothes that almost nobody talks about. When humans started covering their bodies in low sun regions, they blocked even more of the sunlight needed to make vitamin D, the exact same feedback loop we talked about in the video on skin color. Clothing solved the temperature problem, but it made the vitamin D problem worse, and that's part of why the selection pressure for lighter skin up north got even stronger. Two stories that seem completely separate, skin color and clothing, turn out to be tightly woven together, writing a single chapter in the human survival story after leaving the African cradle. So next time you throw on a jacket, on a cold morning, that's not just habit or fashion. You are repeating, almost exactly, the solution your ancestors worked out 170,000 years ago to stay alive long enough, warm enough, for you to exist and read this today.